This patch is pretty light on content for air overall. Of course, we got 2 new F-16s, but in addition to that, all 6 existing F-16s got reworked flight models. I've seen a lot of talk about the removed G limiter from the data mine, so I wanted to take a look at that and see what's new. The first change which got skipped in the data mine post was to fuel. Maximum internal fuel time used to be about 30 minutes, it's now 40 minutes. Drop tank fuel went from roughly 7 minutes to about 10. Total fuel mass hasn't changed, but fuel time has increased by about 40%, and my testing reflects about 40% more time on full afterburner at sea level. So the fuel weighs the same, and the timer counts down at the same rate as it did before, but you just start with more time on the clock now with a full tank, which means you can spawn with less fuel, or if you take a full tank, it will last you 40% longer into the match. Just keep in mind, the less fuel you have, the more agile your plane is, so if you take too much fuel, you won't be able to quickly burn it off. The more interesting change was to maneuverability. For those of you who aren't aware, the F-16's flight model is pretty unique. It flies like it's on rails, and at high speeds and weights just can't pull very hard. So on the live server, the ADF at full fuel and weapons weight can only hit 8 Gs, and that number steadily goes up as the plane sheds weight, up to 12 Gs when it's got no weapons and it's almost out of fuel. Having high weight early in the match gives people the impression that the plane has a G limiter, which is a reasonable conclusion to come to. From what I've been able to gather by talking to people who know more about flight models than I do, the theory I've come to is that the plane doesn't have a G or AOA limiter strictly speaking, but has rather been tuned with elevator compression and a lack of lift at high speed to fly the way it does to feel like it has some kind of G limiter. Regardless of what's causing it, it is probably the most annoying thing about playing the F-16, especially the heavy ones, and it's made worse by the fact that pretty much every other top tier jet can pull as much if not more in the same situation. Now, granted, the high-speed maneuverability is not a deal breaker for this plane, and it's got a lot of other things going for it, but it seems like the consensus is that most players are unhappy with the way the plane feels to fly on the live server. So on the dev server, there are some changes in the flight model file. I don't know what every line does on the FM file, but there are some changes to the pitch section, and there's this new block of code which appears to be an AOA limiter. It looks like now the plane has an AOA limiter modeled. We can look at files and speculate all day long, but what matters is the result. On the live server, full fuel, weapons, and a drop tank, the ADF is hitting 8 Gs, and without a tank, it's also hitting 8 Gs. On the dev server, in the exact same situation, it's up to 10 Gs with a tank and 10 Gs without a tank. Drop the weight, and previously it was hitting up to 12 Gs, it's now hitting 15 Gs. As for the Block 10, using the nets as an example, on full weapons and fuel weight without a drop tank, it can do 9 G on the live server. That has been bumped up to 11 G on the dev server. And when completely empty, it can do an already insane 13 G on the live server. That has been bumped up to an eye-watering 16 G on the dev server, although granted only for a few seconds before you run out of fuel. So across the board, F-16As are pulling about 1 to 2 G harder at high speed than they were before in any given situation, and they do feel more comfortable to play as a result. The F-16A was already a terrifying dogfighter, and it just became that little extra bit scarier. The flight model change doesn't change anything within the hierarchy of existing F-16As. The ADF and MLU are still fatter and less nimble than the A, AJ, and nets. But of course we also have 2 new F-16s entering the ring. I want to start by making a correction from the last video. I said that the F-16C Block 50's new engine more than makes up for the extra weight, but after doing some testing, I'm going to retract that statement. When looking at thrust graphs, the thrust to weight is pretty much even with the Block 10's thrust to weight, and if thrust graphs are not to be trusted, we did some acceleration tests and found that the 2 planes weren't that different in straight line acceleration at low altitude. So it seems like the higher engine power can't go beyond compensating for all the extra weight, since the Block 50 is a fair bit heavier than the older F-16s. I wanted to see how the new Block 50 stacks up against the updated F-16A flight models, so I put the Block 10, 15, and 50 in my loadout and dueled Jube and Garf. None of us are duelists by any means, but we're reasonably well matched against each other, so we were able to see the differences between the planes more clearly. We would swap planes pretty often, and our results were pretty conclusive. When it came to Block 15 ADF versus Block 50, the ADF had the upper hand, and was able to match or narrowly outperform the Block 50 in every way. We felt like when the Block 50 went around, it was because the ADF player messed up, and most of the rounds ended in the ADF taking the win. The Block 10 is a few hundred kilos lighter than the Block 15 with the same engine, so naturally when it came to Block 10 versus Block 50, the Block 50 was getting absolutely cooked, especially in the first turn where the Block 10 was pulling several G more, giving itself a major advantage in the opening of the fight. So overall conclusion based on the current state of the dev server, keeping in mind it's very possible that things change before the update releases. If all you're after is the best dogfight performance in the game, the 3 Block 10 airframes are still going to be what you're looking for, and they're now better than ever this patch. They're followed in flight performance by both ADFs and the MLU, then comes the F-16C Block 50, and the only thing keeping the Block 50 from being the worst F-16 airframe is the Barak 2. Of course, the F-16C's AIM-9M, extra flares, and better radar are going to make it worth picking over an F-16A, but if you're an F-16A enjoyer, this new flight model does feel very nice, and I've got no complaints, but we will have to see if it makes it to the live server. I was hoping the F-16Cs would have been Block 30s for both USA and Israel so we could have seen the best of the GE-powered F-16s, but it is what it is. I'm really looking forward to trying out the new Block 10 flight model on the AJ and the nets when the update goes live. Let me know what you think about what we've seen of the new F-16A flight model so far. Come hang out on Discord, and thanks for watching.